Good afternoon, students. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about sentence structure. And so if you learn sentence structure, then you can avoid sentence fragments. There are three kinds of sentences in English. There's simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. And the fourth kind of sentence is a complex compound sentence, where you just combine a complex sentence with a compound sentence. So without further ado, I'm going to go over sentence structure and different kinds of sentences in English. So here's a fun exercise. Sentences can be joined together by either a coordinating conjunction, subordinating conjunction, or a transition words. All of the following sentences are joined together by different conjunctions. If the conjunction is a coordinating conjunction, then the sentence becomes a dependent clause and you need another sentence to complete the thought. These are known as complex sentences. If the sentences are joined together by coordinating conjunctions, then you have a compound sentence. You need to learn the difference between these conjunctions to avoid sentence fragments. In student essays, I am always commenting to students, learn sentence structure to avoid sentence fragments. I have said this comment in student essays hundreds of times. So today, you will learn sentence structure so that you can avoid sentence fragments. So first, you need to recognize the basic sentence types in English. Simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence, to avoid sentence fragments. What kind of sentences are the following sentences? Are they simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences? What kind of conjunction does it have? A coordinating conjunction or a subordinating conjunction? Google yourself two different kinds of word list. Google yourself a transition word list for your compound sentences, and Google yourself a subordinating conjunction word list for your complex sentences. So here's the fun exercise. What kind of sentences are these? John was fat. Mary was thin. What kind of sentences are these? So you got to think to yourself, so John is the subject, was is the verb, fat is the adjective. Subject, verb, adjective. That's a simple sentence. Mary was thin. Same thing. Subject, verb, adjective. That is a simple sentence. Now you have two simple sentences. John was fat, Mary was thin, joined by a coordinating conjunction. So coordinating conjunction joins two sentences of equal importance. So for, and, fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those are all coordinating conjunctions that combine two sentences of equal importance. John was fat, yet Mary was thin. So that's also part of fanboys, and it's a compound sentence where you join two sentences of equal importance. The next batch of sentences. Although John was fat, Mary was thin. Mary was thin even though John was fat. John was fat, whereas Mary was thin. So here, although John was fat, Mary was thin, and even though, these two are complex sentences, because although is a subordinating conjunction. And when you have a subordinating conjunction introduces, or at the beginning of an independent clause, it becomes a subordinating dependent clause, which is an incomplete thought, which is a sentence fragment. So if you simply say, although John was fat, that is an incomplete thought, that's a sentence fragment. So as soon as you add a subordinating conjunction to a sentence, then it becomes a sentence fragment. So you want to avoid sentence fragments. So let's start. What are the four kinds of sentences in English? So the first kind of sentence is the simple sentence. So the simple sentence, you have subject, verb, object. A sentence is a complete thought, also known as an independent clause. So Jack gets good grades. Jack is the subject, gets is the verb, good is the adjective, grades is the object. So subject, verb, object, simple sentence. Jack studies hard. So subject, verb, adjective, simple sentence. Jack is tall. Subject, verb, adjective, simple sentence. Steve gambles. So this one is subject, verb, simple sentence. Steve loses rarely at the casinos. Subject, verb, adverb, and then you have prepositional phrase. Steve is the subject, loses is the verb, rarely is the adverb, and at the casinos is the prepositional phrase. So a prepositional phrase shows time and place. So examples of prepositional phrases are at the table, on the table, under the table, or at 5 o'clock. Subject, verb, infinitive phrase. Mary likes to dress up. So Mary is the subject, likes is the verb, to dress up is the infinitive phrase. A phrase is a bunch of words with no subject and verb. So that's the difference between a phrase and a clause. Robert eats steak. Now this is the most common simple sentence because it's simply subject is Robert, eats is verb, and steak is the object. Robert likes to dance. Robert is the subject, likes is the verb, to dance is the infinitive. Up the hill sits an old house. And so up the hill is the prepositional phrase, sits is the verb, sits is the verb, sits is the verb, and an old house is the subject. So prepositional phrase, verb, and subject. That's a simple sentence. So all of these are all examples of simple sentences. So the basic structure of a simple sentence is subject, verb, object, with some variations when you add in an infinitive phrase, or sometimes you add in an adjective or a prepositional phrase. But basically a simple sentence, subject, verb, object. Up the hill, I did that one. So the old house, subject, sits, verb, up the hill, prepositional phrase. So subject, verb, prepositional phrase is a simple sentence. Down the street is the police station. So down the street is the prepositional phrase, verb is the verb, and the police station is the subject. So down the street is the police station. That's a simple sentence, which is the same thing, the same meaning as the police station is down the street. So the police station is the subject, is the verb, and down the street is the prepositional phrase. So to repeat, when a simple sentence is an independent clause, a complete sentence that is a complete thought. So a simple sentence can stand alone. A simple sentence is a complete thought. And when you write your essays, you do not want too many simple sentences in a row. You want to be able to vary your sentence structure. You have some simple sentences, some compound sentences, some complex sentences, and some relative clauses. Then you have an interesting sounding essay. So here I just introduced the simplest kind of English sentence, which is the simple sentence, subject, verb, object, which is also known as an independent clause. So let me repeat that. A sentence is a complete thought, also known as an independent clause. That's going to be really important because as I go on with my lecture, I'm going to just say independent clause, and you have to know that when I say independent clause, I mean subject, verb, object. In other words, a simple sentence. The second kind of sentence is a compound sentence. The word compound means two. So if I say compound subject, that means you have two subjects in a sentence. Mary and Joe go to the party. Compound verbs means two verbs in a sentence. John ate and slept, so that's a compound verb. So if you have compound sentences, that simply means you have two sentences joined by a coordinating conjunction, fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, fanboys, okay? So when you have two independent clauses joined by fanboys, and you've got a comma before the fanboys, you have a compound sentence. So a compound sentence always has fanboys in it. Fanboys are coordinating conjunctions that join two sentences together. A coordinating conjunction joins two simple sentences of equal importance to form a compound sentence. So here are some examples. So John ate steak, but Mary ate salad. So here John ate steak, that's one simple sentence, one independent clause. And Mary ate salad, that's another independent clause, joined together by but. And but is one of the fanboys. And you got to remember that when you have a compound sentence like this, you need to put a comma before the coordinating conjunction. That's a very common mistake in essays. What's wrong with this sentence? What's missing here? Okay, we're missing a comma here. This is the kind of error that I see in essays. There you go. John slept in a bed, but Mary slept on the floor. Now, if I don't have this comma in here, this is known as a run-on sentence. In other words, two sentences that are put together with no punctuation. That's known as a run-on sentence. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Okay, so you have to properly punctuate your sentences in order to avoid run-on sentences and to avoid comma splices, which is actually the topic of your quiz this week. All right, so getting back to John slept in a bed, comma, but Mary slept on the floor. So here you have another but. Now if I wanted to be a little different, instead of always saying but, I could say and Mary slept on the floor. Yet Mary slept on the floor. What else didn't I use? For, so fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Or I could say, let's see, and then John is tall, but Mary is short. So here you have a comma and you have a coordinating conjunction. So here you have one independent clause, Jack is tall. Then you have another independent clause, Mary is short. Steve gambles all the time. So that's one independent clause. Then comma, yet he loses rarely at the casinos. So you have a comma before the yet. Mary likes to dress up, comma, so she can feel good about herself. Robert eats steak, comma, and he likes to dance. Usually Mr. Smith goes to the park, or he goes to the beach to take his walks. So here you have your compound sentence. And so here you don't have to worry about quiz sentence. So here is another example of a compound sentence. I could tell the room had been dusted, comma, for all the pictures were crooked. And here, for means because. That's a very British way of talking. Jack gets good grades before he studies hard. So British English tends to use for, while American English uses because. So Jack gets good grades before he studies hard is the same meaning as Jack gets good grades because he studies hard. I could tell the room has been dusted because all the pictures were crooked. And so instead of saying because, another way of saying because is you can have for all the pictures were crooked. And so in a compound sentence, you have fanboys that link two independent clauses together. So independent clause, comma, coordinating conjunction, fanboys, then another independent clause, and that is a compound sentence. So let's review so far. A simple sentence is when you simply have a subject, verb, and object. John eats steak. Then when you have a compound sentence, you have two sentences joined together by fanboys. John eats steak, but Mary eats salad. So far we've done a simple sentence and a compound sentence. The next kind of sentence is known as a complex sentence. A complex sentence is a dependent clause joined together with an independent clause. Now, a dependent clause, if it's by itself, is a sentence fragment. And so there are many different kinds of dependent clauses. You can have an adjective clause, a noun clause, and an adverb clause, which I'll go over in a second. So, what is an adjective clause? What's a clause? I mean, what's the difference between a clause and a phrase? So if I say clause, okay, I said this earlier, and let's see, I'm going to put this up here. A clause is a bunch of words. It doesn't even have to express a full thought, but it's simply a group of words with a subject and a verb. A phrase is a group of words. It's simply a group of words, okay? No subject, with no subject and verb. And so an example of a group of words with a subject and verb would be Jack eats steak. Okay, so Jack is the subject, eats is the verb. And another group of words, although Jack eats steak. Okay, that's also a clause because it has a subject and a verb. But the difference, so let's take a look at the difference. Okay, so here we got clauses. So I have Jack eats steak. So this is a clause because it has a subject plus a verb. This is a complete thought. So therefore, it's an independent clause. Although Jack eats steak. This is also a clause. Okay, you got a group of words with a subject and a verb. But it's not a complete thought. Although Jack eats steak. Then what? So this is a group of words with a subject and a verb, but it's not a complete thought. This is known as a dependent clause. Okay? So that's the difference between an independent clause in which it's a complete sentence and a dependent clause in which it's not a complete sentence. And when we write our papers, we want to avoid dependent clauses because dependent clauses is the same thing as a sentence fragment. It's the same thing as a sentence fragment. Yeah, as a sentence. Now a phrase is a group of words with no subject and verb, like a prepositional phrase. Okay? So here if I say at the store, at the store, on the counter, up the street. Those are all examples of prepositional phrases because at the store, on the counter, and up the street has no subject and verb. Okay, so that's the difference when I say a phrase and then when I say a clause. So getting back to our dependent clauses. All of these words are known as subordinating conjunctions because when you add these words to a sentence, then it makes that sentence subordinate to the next sentence. Subordinate means inferior, not as important, okay? Not a complete thought. Therefore, whenever you use a subordinating conjunction, in front of a sentence, you are rendering that sentence a dependent clause. And also you are rendering that sentence a sentence fragment. So I give you this example up here. So here are all the subordinating conjunctions. That's why I want you to Google a list of subordinating conjunctions so that you know how to avoid sentence fragments, and it will help you compose complex sentences. For when we have a complex sentence, we have a subordinating conjunction, a dependent clause with an independent clause together as one sentence. So let's go over subordinate. This is not the whole list. This is a partial list. There are many, many more subordinating conjunctions in English that turn a sentence into a dependent clause. After, although, as long as though, because, before, even though, if, in order to, now that, once, rather than, since, so that, then, that, though, unless, until, when, whenever, where, whereas, wherever, whether, while. These are all subordinating conjunctions. And if you use any of these words in front of a sentence, you automatically turn that independent clause into a dependent clause. So let me give you a quick example. So if I say, let's get back to John eats steak. Now, this is an independent clause because this is a complete thought, right? So independent clause. Now, I want to add subordinating conjunction to the sentence. So I'm going to add after John eats steak. So I just added the word subordinating conjunction after. Now suddenly, if I add after to my sentence, it suddenly turns into an incomplete thought, so that we turn the sentence into a dependent clause. So this is what I mean by if you use any of the subordinating conjunctions, you're turning your sentence into a dependent clause. So mistakes that I see on papers is which is very good as a sentence, or especially at this time. Those are all sentence fragments because you're starting your sentence, even though that's not on this list, but which is actually a relative clause. So we don't start our sentences with relative clauses because that's also a subordinating conjunction. Okay, so like I said, this is just a partial list of subordinating conjunctions. Other subordinating conjunctions and relative clauses include who, which, when, how, off the top of my head. I think I'm going to cover that next off the top of my head. So, getting back to our types of sentences. So when you have a dependent clause, so here, after John eats steak, it's not a complete thought. So how do we complete this thought? After John eats steak, he goes for a walk in order to, because when you eat steak, it's really heavy on the stomach. Then it becomes a complete sentence. All right. If you add another complete independent clause to your dependent clause, now you've got a complete sentence, and this complete sentence is known as a complex sentence. That is the third kind of sentence in English, in which you have a dependent clause after John eats steak, joined together with an independent clause, he goes for a walk. And when you put the two dependent and independent clauses together, that's known as a complex sentence. If you are missing your independent clause, like which is very good, or after John eats steak, that's a sentence fragment. So here are some examples of complex sentences. Now, if the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you need to put a comma. Example, after John eats dinner, dependent clause, comma, he goes to bed. Although Jack is fat, comma, he eats very little. As soon as the alarm clock rings, comma, Steve jumps out of bed. So here you have, although Jack is fat, dependent clause, comma, independent clause. As soon as the alarm clock rings, dependent clause, because it's not a complete thought, because it begins with all of the subordinating conjunctions, although, as soon as, because, before, if, and then here, although, as long as, although, because, before, if. And so here, as long as I study hard, comma, I can get good grades. Because Michael Jordan is a great basketball player, he plays great basketball. So because Michael Jordan is, okay, I wrote tall, is tall, okay, he plays great basketball. So there you have a dependent clause, comma, and an independent clause. Before I go to bed, comma, I brush my teeth. If I avoid sick people, comma, I can catch fewer colds. Once I get my driver's license, comma, I will build my own car. Rather than spending a lot of money on clothes, I like to make my own clothes. And so all of these are dependent clause, comma, and then independent clause. And then together, it becomes a complex sentence. If the there's more. Since I lost my husband, comma, I have to get a job. Unless you do your job perfectly, comma, you will get fired. When I was younger, comma, I used to have more energy. So the words in the table and the bolded words are all examples of subordinating conjunctions. Now, if the subordinating conjunction or the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, you don't need a comma. So John goes to bed after he eats dinner, no comma. He eats very little, although he is fat. Steve jumps out of bed as soon as the alarm clock rings. I can get good grades as long as I study hard. Michael Jordan plays great basketball because he is tall. I brush my teeth before I go to bed. I can catch fewer colds if I avoid sick people. Michael Jordan plays great basketball because he is tall. So all of these sentences are complex sentences. Now we're going to get into, so a sentence fragment is after John eats dinner, so it's not a complete thought. So here, if you want to complete the thought, you have to add a independent clause. So after John eats dinner, he goes to bed. Now you have a complete thought. You have a dependent clause with an independent clause, and it becomes a complex sentence. Now, other subordinating conjunctions that I didn't mention are known as adjective clauses, and also known as relative clauses. And so here, who, whose, which, that, they have their own comma rules, okay? Different from the, this is what I would call regular subordinating conjunctions. Okay, this is just me. This is not from some grammar book, okay? So this helps me remember. This will help you remember the two different kinds of subordinating conjunctions in your head. Regular subordinating conjunctions, where when the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you put a comma. And then when the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, you don't need a comma. Now you've got the exceptions. I know, don't you hate the exceptions to the rule? The exceptions to the rule is when you have who, whom, whose, which, that. So here, when you have a relative clause, I love the table. That is made of wood. So if the dependent clause when you have a dependent clause using these words, at the end of a sentence, you have one comma. Yep, a whole new set of rules. Then when you use these words and the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence, guess what? 2 commas. Yeah. So if you want to learn more about this particular rule, you can look up non-restrictive or restrictive clauses. Okay? Non-restrictive and restrictive adjective clauses, or non-restrictive and restrictive relative clauses. For instance, we only use the commas if it's not important to the sentence. But if it's important to the sentence, then we don't use. What did I just say? Oh, we use the commas when it's not important to the sentence, and when it's important to the sentence, we don't use commas. So that's a whole nother issue that I will teach in another, that's a different video, okay, where I will compare and teach you what's considered important in the sentence and what's considered not important. Right now, all I want you to focus on is just when you have regular subordinating conjunctions that goes in the beginning of the sentence, you put a comma. In a regular subordinating conjunction, at the end of the sentence, no comma. However, when you're using who, whom, which, that, if the who, whom, which, that dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, you use 1 comma, and at the who, whom, which, that is at the beginning of the sentence, you use 2 commas. 1 comma at the beginning of the sentence and 1 comma at the end of the sentence. And that's usually enough for students to go, ooh. And so that's why I'm not adding in restrictive, non-restrictive, and I'm not going to add more, okay? I will do that in the next video, okay? So I'm just giving you the icing on the cake so that you get a general idea of sentence structure in English, okay? Just the very basics. So basically, in this video, you learn that you've got the simple sentence, subject, verb, object. You've got the compound sentence where you've got the independent clause, fanboys, with 1 comma before the fanboys, and then another independent clause. And then the third kind of sentence, which is what we're doing here, is known as the complex sentence, in which you have a dependent clause together with an independent clause. That's all this is. It's a dependent clause with an independent clause fused together to become a complex sentence. And then you've got many different kinds of dependent clauses. So that's what we're doing, is many different kinds. You've got adjective clauses, you've got noun clauses. That's also another video. Okay, I will do another video on different kinds of clauses, because that's something else altogether. That's another chapter. So basically, all you have to know for this one is that when you have a who, whom, which, that, you have, when it's who, whom, which, that at the beginning of the sentence, you use 2 commas, and when the who, whom, which, that dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, you use 1 comma. And then you can look up non-restrictive, restrictive clauses and appositives if you want to learn more about this particular rule. You're like, wait a minute, what? So that's all I have the time for this lesson without overwhelming people. Whoa, 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 whoa. That's why I try to stick just a little bit. And when I tell people this is just a small lesson, and they're like, no, it's not. That's a lot. So yeah, and this is me trying to simplify it. All right, so I just repeated myself. Simple sentence, John eats dinner, subject, verb, object. Compound sentence, John likes to walk outside. And then here, with the compound sentence, if you have a transition word. So when you have a transition word, you can either use a semicolon and a comma, or you can simply put a period and a comma. So here, for instance, a transition word. See, that's how come you're going to, wait, how do I know the difference between a transition word and a subordinating conjunction? I'll get to that in a second. So here, John likes to walk outside, period. And then you're going to have to go, therefore he is fit. Okay? So that's another way of fixing those 2 sentences together. Okay? So when you have 2 sentences joined together with a transition words, that's also considered a compound sentence. And then a complex sentence is when you have a dependent clause with an independent clause. So that pretty much sums up your 3 kinds or 4 kinds. I'm not even going to go into compound complex sentence. If you want to do that, well, that's the next one. Okay, so let's just do the first 3. John drinks water, subject, verb, object, simple sentence. John drinks a lot of water, but he is still thirsty. Compound sentence. 2 sentences joined by fanboys. Although John drinks a lot of water, he is still thirsty. So you have a dependent clause. Although John drinks a lot of water, he is still thirsty. So here you have a dependent clause and an independent clause together, and that makes a complex sentence. So if you want to just remember, if you can remember these 3 sentences, they're known as mentor sentences. That means that those are the 3 sentences you memorize so that you can remember the 3 kinds of sentences in English. And mentoring means that you remember, if you can just remember those 3 sentences, those sentences act as a mentor so that it will help you organize in your head what exactly, how am I going to remember all this material? And that's the trick, is mentor sentences. Always try to remember mentor sentences. So when I teach grammar, I will try to give you mentor sentences so that you just remember 2 or 3 sentences and you can remember all the rules. Okay? So I will try to give you more mentor sentences. Now, the last kind of sentences in English is a compound complex sentence. As the name suggests, a compound complex sentence means that you combine the compound sentence. You just simply add a dependent clause to a compound sentence. That's all it is, you know? I mean, it sounds really fancy and complicated, but it's not. So let's go back to our compound sentence, friend. John drinks a lot of water, but he is still thirsty. So everybody knows that's a compound sentence. Okay, so all I'm going to do is write John drinks a lot of water, but that's it. That's all I did, was I added a dependent clause. And suddenly, this becomes a compound complex sentence. That's the easiest way I can show you as to what I did, was I added the dependent clause. Remember, when you have who, whose, which, that, you need to have 2 commas. So that was the rule that I was, talking myself blue in the face about, that special rule where when you have who, whose, which, that, if it's at the beginning of the sentence, you have 2 commas, and if who, which, that dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, you have 1 comma. Anyway, so this is the example. It's known as an appositive, okay? This is an adjective clause because an adjective clause modifies the noun John. That's basically what an adjective clause is it modifies the noun. And an adjective clause is not only an adjective clause, it's also a relative clause, and it's also a dependent clause. All at the same time. Yeah, can you believe it? It's a dependent clause because if I were to simply say, who is fat? Well, that's not a complete thought. That's a sentence fragment. Unless you're asking a question, who in this room is fat? Well, that's not even a sentence. That's a question, right? So that's not even a sentence. So if I add in a dependent clause into my compound sentence, then I convert that compound sentence into a compound complex sentence. Why? Because he is still thirsty. That's an independent clause. John drinks a lot of water, but he is still thirsty. Compound sentence. John, who is fat, drinks a lot of water. That sentence alone is a complex sentence because you have a dependent clause with an independent clause trapped together as one sentence. And then if I put all of the sentences together, John, who drinks a lot of water, but he is still thirsty. And this is a great way for you to add. So if I say John is fat, John drinks a lot of water, John is thirsty, John. You got too many sentences of the same subject, then you can combine the sentences together into compound sentences or compound complex sentences. So that's one of the advantages. It's not when you know sentence structure. It's not only to avoid sentence fragments, it's also so you don't have John, I, he, she. In other words, you have a whole bunch of too many of the same subjects. You sound repetitious and redundant. So it's good to have sentence variety. So this is the simplest kind of sentence variety. There are many other ways to have sentence variety. Like you can have a gerund. This is just the icing on the cake. At just the very beginning. So that's why it's fun, when you're just starting out. So that's how you have a compound complex sentence. If I take this dependent clause out, John drinks a lot of water, but he is still thirsty. Then it turns back into a compound sentence. So that's all this is. And also in English, the longest sentence you can have is a compound complex sentence. Now in other languages like French or Spanish, you can have sentences like John, who is French, who speaks a lot of, who eats a lot of steak, who does this, who, which. Hey, that sounds good in Spanish. In French, if you know how to write it in an elegant manner. There's an elegant way of putting all those relative clauses together. But we never do that in English, not even in an elegant way. Because if you put a lot of relative clauses together in English, it just sounds clunky. Okay, so in English, the longest sentence you can have was what I just said. John, who is fat, drinks a lot of water, but he is still thirsty. So in English, that's it. So as the name suggests, a compound subject Compound complex sentence brings both of these sentences forms together. And so in a compound complex sentence, you have at least two independent clauses, like a compound sentence, and at least one dependent clause, like a complex sentence. So here is an example. Mary is rich. That's a simple sentence. Mary is rich, but John is poor. That's a compound sentence. While Mary is rich, John is poor. That's a complex sentence. So if I combine all of them to create a compound complex sentence, I would have Mary who is rich. Mary who is French is very rich, but John who is American is very poor. And this is great parallelism, because I have Mary. We're missing your hit that got right. So you got to have your got to remember to have all those. Okay, Mary who is French is very rich, but John who is American is very poor. So this is a compound complex sentence because I added two dependent clauses into my compound sentence. Originally it was Mary is rich, but John is poor, and then I added who is French and who is American, and that turned it into a compound complex sentence. Here's another example. Lupe is a great student. She went to school a long time ago. She is reviewing her grammar. So here you have three simple sentences that you can combine together into a compound complex sentence because you have the same subject. As soon as you have three sentences that are the same subject, then you can combine them together. So Lupe, who is a great student, went to school a long time ago, and she is reviewing her grammar. So here you have a compound complex sentence. Another example, John likes to eat. John likes to sleep. And so here you would say, John, who likes to eat, likes to sleep, but Mary likes to eat instead of sleeping. Another example, Erin loves her brother. Her brother loves her too. Her brother pays his bills while she pays his bills. So Erin loves her brother, and he loves her too because she pays his bills. So here you combined it into a compound complex sentence. The dog ran off when I chased him, but I didn't care. So the dog ran off, independent clause, but I didn't care. Another independent clause, that's the compound sentence. And then here, when I chased him, is the dependent clause that I added to the sentence. Though my mother says it doesn't matter, I am tall and she is short. So compound complex sentences are the most complicated sentences in English, as their name implies. A compound complex sentence has at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. In simple terms, an independent clause can be a sentence on its own, while a dependent clause cannot, because a dependent clause is never a complete thought. So a compound complex sentence helps us express longer, more complicated thoughts with more parts than other sentences. They're good tools for explaining complicated ideas or for describing long chains of events. So here is another example of simple. Here the simple sentence would be, the severe storms caused a record number of tornadoes. That's one simple sentence. Cooler La Nina temperatures were part of the cause. That's another simple sentence. So there are many different ways in which I can combine these two simple sentences together. I could either combine the two simple sentences with a subordinating conjunction, although the severe storms caused a record number of tornadoes, cooler La Nina temperatures were part of the cause. So here I revised these two simple sentences as a complex sentence because I have a dependent clause and an independent clause, because I use the subordinating conjunction although. Another way I can combine these two simple sentences is to use fanboys, and, but, or, nor, so, yet. So here I'm going to revise it as a compound sentence. The severe storms caused a record number of tornadoes, and the cooler La Nina temperatures were part of the cause. So that would be the compound sentence. Now, in a compound complex sentence, I'm going to put these two simple sentences together, and I'm going to add a third idea, something that's not even there before. Although the severe storms caused a record number of tornadoes, cooler La Nina temperatures were part of the cause. Okay, that's the same thing as this one, okay? All I did was make a complex sentence, okay? Now, and next year should see fewer, less severe storms. This idea of the less severe storms is not in any of, it's not in simple, it's not in the complex. This is only in the compound complex, because when you have a compound complex sentence, it allows you to add a third idea. And that third idea is usually that dependent clause. In this case, it's not a dependent, but anyway, it allows you a third idea. So a compound complex sentence, as I said before, is the longest sentence that you can have in English. Sentence fragments. So now that you understand the different kinds of sentences, you now understand what is a sentence fragment, like any dependent clause or any clause with a subordinating conjunction automatically becomes a sentence fragment. So that's why when you know sentence structure, you understand sentence fragments. So that's why when I say in everybody's feedback, if you study sentence structure, you can avoid sentence fragments. And so let's go into the next portion of my lecture is going to be about sentence fragments. Sentence fragments are missing parts of the sentence. Like your sentence is missing a subject, missing a verb, and so therefore if your sentence is missing a subject or a verb, then it becomes an incomplete thought or an incomplete sentence. And so a sentence fragment does not express a complete thought. And also a sentence fragment is a dependent clause. So a dependent clause not attached to an independent clause is a sentence fragment. So here are some examples of a sentence fragment. Broke the glass. Okay, that's a sentence fragment because who broke the glass? You're missing a subject. The dog broke the glass. Now that's a simple sentence. Subject, verb, object. Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Well, what did Mr. and Mrs. Smith do? That's a sentence fragment because it's missing a verb and an object. So what about them? So the predicate, which is verb and object, is missing. So if I say Mr. and Mrs. Smith are old people, now that is a complete thought. You do not have to know this for a quiz. This is for the other school. So, other examples of sentence fragment is not to a coworker or secretary, or and not sound like a faker when he is fat, although she sings, who is French, if a person talks to a coworker who doesn't like him or her. Think about it. Are these sentences complete thoughts, or does it leave you hanging? So if a sentence leaves you hanging, then it's a sentence fragment. Run-on sentence. So run-on and comma splice sentences occur when you have incorrect punctuation, or you just leave out the punctuation altogether. So that's why punctuation is important. So a run-on sentence is two or more sentences written as one. Usually people forget to put a period at the end of a sentence. That's a typical run-on sentence. A sentence can contain more than one thought as long as it is punctuated correctly. Oh yeah, we just did that with as soon as the alarm clock rings, comma, he jumps out of bed. So if you can have two different ideas of something, of alarm clock rings, he jumps out of bed, but then when the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you put a comma. So you can have two ideas in a sentence as long as you have proper punctuation. But a run-on sentence occurs when ideas are joined together incorrectly with incorrect punctuation. You have no idea how many times I have to tell students, you're missing a comma. Put a comma, put a period after your sentences. So for you guys, your quiz is about how to fix a sentence. If you have a run-on sentence, how do you fix it? How do you recognize a run-on sentence. And what's the difference between a run-on sentence and a comma splice? This is where your quiz centers. My other school quiz centered on recognizing what is a sentence fragment, and that's not important for you guys to know. Anyway, so there are two kinds of run-on sentences. You've got fused sentence and you've got the comma splice. A fused sentence is when you have two sentences together with no period, so that the two ideas are fused together incorrectly. A comma splice is when you have two simple sentences put together with an unnecessary comma. Now, when we put two sentences together, we don't just put a comma there. We usually either we put a comma and a coordinating conjunction, or we put a semicolon, or we put a period. Those are the three ways that we can properly get rid of comma splices and run-on sentences. I believe that's pretty much your quiz, is those three ideas in which they ask in a gazillion different ways for that one fact, okay? So if you can understand that one fact, then you've got your week 5 quiz nailed. Okay, so let's get into it. A comma splice is when you use a comma instead of a period at the end of a sentence. A comma splice occurs when two independent clauses are joined with a comma instead of a conjunction. So just add fanboys, or a semicolon, or a coordinating conjunction. So I'm going to add that here. So to fix a comma splice sentence, you want to add a semicolon, or you add a comma, and a coordinating conjunction, coordinating, or you add a period. And Sean, the video guy, did not go over adding the period. Okay, that was one of the questions. So if you have a comma splice, I don't know if I went over it. I'll just do it again. So here, if I have John ate dinner, John ate dinner, he went to the restaurant. That's a comma splice, okay? That's not correct, because here you have one independent clause. Where's your period? And then you got another independent clause. And so how do we fix a comma splice? So according for your quiz, the first one is you can add a semicolon. So correct. John ate dinner, semicolon. He went to the restaurant. Restaurant. Correct. You can add a comma and a coordinating conjunction. John ate dinner and he went to the restaurant. Or, correct. John ate dinner, period. He went to the restaurant, and you could also have here John ate dinner, dinner, semicolon. In addition, he went to the restaurant. Instead of saying and ad nauseum, you want to put in some transition words of addition. So if you want to add variety, so you don't want to use fanboys all the time, then we use transition words of addition. Now I'm going to go over transition words in a different lesson, in which I teach you how to use different, like transition words are different kinds of transition words. Transition words of opposition, transition words of time, transition words of consequence, transition words of consequence, transition words of cause and effect. And you're like, eyes going, what's that, okay? So that's a different lesson. I think that's week 8, if you want to look it up. I did it for my other school. Right now on my writing channel, that's the week 8 instructor session. If you're in a rush to learn, from the, but I'm going to write it. This I wrote just for LAPU, so I took out all the, but anyway, these are the 4 ways in which you can correct your comma splice. This is also the 4 ways you can correct your run-on sentence. For both run-on sentence and comma splice, these are the 4 ways in which you can correct. So either with a semicolon, with a comma and coordinating conjunction, with a period, or with a, I'm not sure if this covers on your quiz. I think your quiz just does the first 3. But this is another one, semicolon and transition word. You can look at my week 5 quiz notes, and I go over much faster how you correct your, I think all I did was repeat myself this portion of the lecture over and over again in the week 5 quiz notes about how you fix a comma splice and how you fix a fused sentence, a run-on sentence. Okay, so another kind of run-on sentence is a fused sentence. And just like with comma splice, a fused sentence is when you have 2 sentences with no period. You see, with a comma splice, it just means you have an unnecessary comma between 2 sentences. That's a comma splice, when you just have an unnecessary comma, whereas a fused sentence means there's no period there, okay? So that's the difference between a fused sentence, no period, and a comma splice, you got an unnecessary comma. And in both cases, that's how you fix it. That's how you make it correct. And that seems to be what your week 5 quiz focuses on, is what is a fused sentence, what is a comma splice, what is a sentence fragment, and how to fix it. That's very practical. And you can also watch Sean's video. I think he has 2 videos on that one, off the top of my head. Anyway, so you can watch his video as well. You can also, and if you have, and this, I'm not sure if this is on your quiz. I might be going beyond your quiz. I think your quiz only does these 3. The other ways of correcting is if it's the same subject, then you can use relative clauses. I get the feeling that goes beyond your quiz, but John ate dinner, he went to the restaurant. In this case, since you have the same subject, you could say John, who ate dinner, went to the restaurant. If it's 2 different subjects, that doesn't work. But if you have 2 sentences with the same subject, you can use who. So instead of just saying John ate dinner, John went to the restaurant, you can say John, who ate dinner, went to the restaurant. Or you can have John, who went to the restaurant, ate dinner. Okay, I'm not sure if your quiz goes for that at all. But anyway, that's good for you to know. And here are other comma splice examples. The can of mushroom soup must have spoiled. It was bulging at the top. Now, if I had students in this class, I would stop right here and I would ask, how would you fix that comma splice? What are the 4 ways you fix that comma splice? And then the very smart student would then go, I would add the semicolon, I would add the period, I would add the comma and the coordinating conjunction. I believe those are the 3 options. There could be another one to correct that sentence. So the can of mushroom soup must have spoiled, period, it was bulging at the top. Or correct, the can of mushroom soup must have spoiled, semicolon, it was bulging at the top. Correct, the can of mushroom soup must have spoiled, semicolon, I did that one already, sorry, comma, and it was bulging at the top. I believe that's your quiz. It could be another one too. So correct, the can of mushroom soup must have spoiled. In addition, it was bulging at the top. So those are the 4 ways. I actually have more, but I'm not going to go beyond that. Okay, that's good enough for you. That's good enough for now, and I'm the icing on the cake. I could actually, so once I get into it, I come up with more and more and more. And then I've done that in the past when I used to teach ESL. And I remember I would come up with all of these different ways to fix the sentences. And then the students would be like, wow, for you, teacher, it's so easy. You play with the sentences like Mozart plays on the piano. It's so easy for you. And I would get so lost in creating more and more and more and more sentences. Like I used to go in 10 different sentences just to show 10 different examples. And then they would be like, wow. After that, I learned later, that was during my first job, I learned later that people can only focus on 3 or 4 revisions at a time. If I put 10 or 11 or 12 or 14 revisions all at the same time, I didn't realize that at the time. In my very first, when I was teaching at first, but I get so into it because it's so much fun. For me, it's fun because I know how to do it, and it's always been, Anyway, I respect my parents, comma, I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. So this is also a comma splice because it has an unnecessary comma. And so in the same way, you would have I respect my parents, period. And then you would have, I resent their attempts to change me, or to choose a career for me. Or you can have a semicolon, or you can have a comma, and, or you can have in addition, that sort of thing. So these 4 ways, if I just stick to 4, people can barely remember that. And so here are some more examples of fused sentences. So when you have a comma splice, you have an unnecessary comma, while when you have a fused sentence, you're missing the most popular language in the world is Chinese. You need a comma. Then more than 1 billion people speak it. So here you have a run-on sentence. George knew the answer to the last exam question. He didn't have enough time to write his response. So this is a fused sentence. And that seems to be it. I'm used to doing more because my other school, we also go over dangling modifiers and misplaced modifiers. Then we end the lesson. But anyway, so that's basically all you need to know for your sentence structure quiz for week 5. I didn't go over, you're probably thinking, well, why did your quiz notes so short? Why couldn't you have gone over this in the quiz notes? And the reason being is I thought that if you guys watch the Sean video, that's supposed to cover all of this, so that I wouldn't have to need to go over everything. So I thought that the Sean videos did it already. I guess I was wrong, because then in week 5, everyone's going, I want to learn more sentence structure. I want to learn more sentence structure. So that's why I stop share. Yeah, so I thought that, the Sean videos were supposed to cover all of this. And so that's why I didn't, go into detail. You were supposed to watch the Sean video first, and then my quiz notes were just supposed to be supplements. Then I realized that most people just simply went straight to the quiz notes, probably without even watching the Sean videos, or even realizing that Sean videos exist. So that's why I decided, okay, out of popular demand, I will create a sentence structure video, so I go over the very basics of the different kinds of sentences in English. So I hope that, and when we see each other on any of the Google Meets, if you have any additional questions, so that's why I expect you to watch this video before we see each other on Google Meet, so that if you have any questions about sentence structure, you could say, well, I didn't understand the part about compound complex. Can you explain that part again? Or I didn't quite understand the part about, the difference between a fused sentence and a comma splice. Can you explain that part again? That sort of thing. So usually when I have students who attend my Zoom lectures, those are the kind of questions I get. So I hope that this video is very helpful in teaching you about sentence structure and helps you with that quiz on sentence structure, and also helps you avoid sentence fragments when you write your papers, and also helps you with your sentence variety. So if you have any questions, you can always email me. So I think this is the end of this video. So I just want to say goodbye to everyone.